Okay, so it's been a while since my last video and a lot of things have changed. So let's get right into it. This video will be almost exclusively about Vex Armor Chroma. Why am I focusing on Chroma? Because he's used for credits. And also because his loadout is different from most other frames, which do still use Eclipse. Okay, so without a lot of talking, let's get into the builds and into what changed specifically. The main things that have changed about Chroma are that Chroma is no longer using Eclipse because Vex Armor is now a better buff than Eclipse, at least on Chroma. Other than that, we have Volt's first ability, Shock, infused onto Chroma. This is so we can use Shock Trooper, which does not combine anymore, meaning that with a on-call crewmate, we can actually cover all elements on Chroma now, which we couldn't before. This also means that we no longer have to use our operator to cover electric, which makes the runs faster overall. Aside from that, this is a relatively standard Chroma build. You have some oddities here, like I have put Rage on here, because as Chroma, you're constantly taking damage, and this is just to help with your energy economy a little bit. It helps especially when your runs take a bit longer. You'll also see flow in here. If we take another look at my Archon shards, you'll see that I have yellow shards that increase maximum energy on spawn. What this means is that we have 826 energy from Prime Flow, and we have, as you can see down there, start missions with 826 energy, meaning we have this energy to use throughout the entire run. Other than that, I also have a strength shard and I have a casting speed shard. This is not that important. You can also put strength, you can also put duration. There's some flexibility in there, especially if you don't have the shards that I do. Coming back to the build, one of the most important parts for your DPS is Arcane Velocity, so I really recommend you get it. We also have Arcane Avenger, since, like I said, you're constantly taking damage, so you constantly have Avenger procced, which is just a flat DPS increase for you. Also, we have Steel Charge in here. If you have the Forma left, you can put Sprint Speed. This makes it so you get to Prophet Taker faster, and your overall run cycles are slightly faster. Also, Adaptation is pretty obvious. This makes it so you don't have to actually run a Triumbral build to have good survivability, and you only need one Umbral Forma to make this build work. Because as you can see, I already have a Polarity issue on here, and I'm still at 6 capacity, and I only have 4 Forma on here, one of which is an Umbral Forma. Meaning that this build, aside from the obvious Umbral Forma, is actually comparatively cheap. And one last thing about Chroma. Because his second ability is based on your energy color, you want to run something that is sort of reddish if you want more survivability, because that gives you more HP, and with the armor that Vex Armor is already giving you, that is probably the best that you can use for survivability. If you don't need the survivability, you can rather run something maybe greenish, because that will give you the toxin buff, and that will give you a bit of holster damage, upping your DPS slightly. Next, we have our primary weapon. This, as before, is the Kuva Ogris, which is also running a pretty standard build. The Riven, it has to have at least multi-shot. If you don't have a Riven, just put more fire rate over it or something. You want to have a lot of magazine. There's 6 pylons in the second pylon phase, so running Prime Magazine Warp and Tainted Mag gives you 7. You can also run normal magazine warp, which gives you 6, which is also enough, but doesn't let you miss any pylons without reloading. This does not kill pylons in one tick, but you'll just have to wait a second or two for them to break. I'll show what that looks like in a second. If you don't have the Kuva Ogris, or you don't want to farm out the 60%, because that's the only thing that matters, the element does not matter, then you can just use the normal Ogris, which also works. It does a bit less damage, but it also has more magazine, and it's a lot easier to get. The Arcane doesn't really matter, I just use it so I have less recoil on this. If I would be running Volt, I would be running Fractionalized Reset, because this makes it so I can instantly reload. The main thing that changed for Ogris is that because Eclipse is no longer used, or because Eclipse is no longer as good as it was before, it doesn't kill pylons instantly anymore. It just takes 1 or 2 seconds longer now. Next up, our secondary is still 10 diplos. You can use a lot of other weapons now, but they're all still worse than 10 diplos. Some usable options include the Piranha Prime, but also basically anything that has like high crit damage. You can use something like Rattle Guts as well. The only difference if you use something that doesn't have innate magnetic, like a diplos does, is that you have to use the magnetic mod, like this. Magnetic Might you get as a quest reward for doing the 1999 quest. You'll just find it in your inventory when you're done. In terms of build for the Tenet diplos, there's not much that has changed in that regard. You still use accelerated isotope, lethal torrent. If you use a Riven, it's still viral and crit damage or multi-shot or damage to corpus, something like that. If you don't have a Riven, you just replace lethal torrent and the Riven slot with toxin and cold mods, which would look like this. In terms of arcane, there really isn't anything that can be used on chroma in Profit Taker that really increases damage significantly, except for secondary enervate. It's new, it's relatively cheap, it's not that hard to farm, and it gives you a pretty significant DPS increase. Also, you don't necessarily have to use Amalgam Barrel Diffusion. It's actually pretty useless. You can just put Barrel Diffusion over top and get a very slight damage increase. All in all, the elements that we're running on our secondary, even if it's not diplos, should be ideally impact, puncture, and slash, but also viral, heat, radiation, and magnetic. You can achieve radiation and magnetic with the mods, accelerated isotope and magnetic might, and you can use mods to create viral heat, and ideally you already have impact, puncture, and slash on your weapon. Some of these elements, you'll notice, are also on our Zaw. The reason why we run them on both is so you can have more consistency and you can just spam your weapons without thinking about what elements are on what. Concerning our melee weapon, you'll notice that it's still a Bala Zaw. It is Pei Bala Vargeet 2J. Make sure it's Vargeet 2J and not Vargeet J2, because that impacts how much crit chance and attack speed you have. And Vargeet 2J has more crit chance, so you can achieve 100% crit with only Sacrificial Steel. The reason why we use Bala as our strike is because Bala as a dagger has the fastest throwing animation, so it's easiest to spam it. Which brings me to the build on our Zaw. It is mostly the same as before. You'll notice that we're not running Prime Pressure Point on this. We're also not running Hornet Strike on our secondary. This is because Vex Armor, Chroma's damage buff, is additive to this multiplier. So running these mods doesn't actually give you that much of an increase to where it makes sense to run them, instead of something like Primed Smite Corpus or something like Organ Shatter. Other than that, we're using the new Magnetic Rush mod on here, which, like I said, you'll notice we're doubling some elements between weapons just because we can. We are running Exodia Contagion. It doesn't have to be rank 3, it can be rank 0. It just has to be there. Melee Exposure, you can use some low rank one. You don't have to have it maxed. It'll almost always be procced and it'll almost always one-shot. If you notice that this build isn't one-shotting some elements, you can replace Primed Fury with Primed Smite Corpus. But this will decrease your attack speed and it will decrease the projectile speed very noticeably. All in all, the elements we're running on this are Impact, Puncture, and Slash as usual, but also Gas Cold modded on, and Magnetic and Radiation with the Magnetic and Radiation mods. Also, we're getting Corrosive from Melee Exposure and Blast innately from Exodia Contagion. That being said, the focus school I run is Madurai, simply because of Phoenix Talons, which increases your damage slightly. If you don't have Prime Sure-Footed on your Chroma like I do, you can use something like Handspring instead, or you can use Sure-Footed, which gives you 60% plus Fortitude, which gives you 40% for 100% knockdown resist. But this will cost you a slot on your build, so it's not necessarily recommended. You'll have to see for yourself. If you don't want to get knockdown resistance with mods, you can also use the Unairu Focus School for Poise, which gives you knockdown resist for 40 seconds, or just switching to Operator. When it comes to our companion, the best thing that you can use if you are trying to farm credits and also do as much damage as possible is the Adarza Kavat. Nowadays, any beast type companion, meaning Kavats, Kubros, etc., can use the Prosperous Retriever mod, which has a chance to double your credits. What our companion should also do is increase our crit damage and increase our fire rate. This only works if we have our shields over 1200, and as you can see, even with calculated redirection, we are only at 945, which means that we have to make use of the reload part of Reinforced Bond, which Synth Fiber helps with because it gives you passive reload, and every tick of passive reload actually counts as a reload for Reinforced Bond. Other than that, this is just a standard Adarza Kavat build with Tech Enhance, Tech Assault, Cat's Eye, and what have you. Prime Pack Leader also helps you keep the overshields up, because if you kill some enemies with your Contagion, your cat gets some overguard. The claw build doesn't really matter. You just have to have bite on it, so you have over 50% crit chance for Tenacious Bond, and you can also use Elusive Posture so it doesn't run around as much. If you don't have an Adarza Kavat, you can also just use like a Panzer Vulpaphyla or like a Smida Kavat or anything similar, really. In terms of Archwing, you always use the Itzal because it has the highest sprint speed and you put Hyperion thrusters on it, and that's about it. We are going to use our archgun on a necromech. Which necromech you use doesn't really matter. I use Bone Widow mainly because she's a bit thinner, and if you use her second ability, she sits a bit lower, so the angle is slightly better, but other than that, it doesn't really matter. The build on it doesn't really matter either. What matters is the archgun. The archgun we're using is the Corvus on our mech. This is because the Corvus is one of 2 usable weapons right now that actually one-shots and doesn't have any sort of weird hitbox problems or whatever. This is what my build looks like. It's magnetic, the Riven is damage to corpus multi-shot. You have to use something like this, so a full charge shot one-shots, or even maybe not full charged, but you need to have a Riven to one-shot at all. If you don't have a Riven, you'll need 2 charged shots, which is very bad, and which is one of the things that were actually changed with the Jade update, because the Prophet Taker legs now have way more health, or not way more health, but like way more effective HP, meaning that you have to do way more damage to them to kill them. You can also use the Mausolon in hand, which a build for that would look somewhat like this, but I will not be showcasing that today. As for the other parts of our setup, you need Railjack intrinsics, and you need quite a lot of them. The most important part is command. You want it at least rank 9 or 10, so you can get crewmates, because crewmates are very helpful. They kill enemies, and they clear shields for you. Specifically, they allow you to actually cover all elements in one setup. What rank 10 does specifically is it allows your crewmates to have a perk, one of which is more crit chance with rifles, which is very important, which we'll see in a second. The other intrinsics you want are Vengeful Archwing at rank 8, so you actually have a bit more damage when you're in Archwing. This matters for pylons. You also want Piloting rank 8, so you have a bit more Archwing speed. This matters for getting to Prophet Taker. And Tactical rank 8 for reduced Archwing blink cooldown. You also want Gunnery rank 5, which you're gonna get on your way to rank 8, so you actually have a bit more damage in Necromech. This matters for the armor phase when you're shooting legs from your Necromech. Next up, we have crewmates. Specifically, you want one that has as high as possible combat, as high as possible repair, and as a last priority, as high as possible endurance. So in an ideal situation, you would have a stat spread of 0-0-5-5-5. If you get an elite crewmate, which you can only get with command rank 10, then you can also get the crit chance perk that you can see right there. This is especially important for Opticore, which is currently the recommended weapon for your crewmate. When it comes to the build, it's pretty simple. Crewmates don't use Rivens. Crewmates can only use non-conditional arcanes, meaning they benefit from the reload speed and primary merciless. Aside from that, we have a standard build for our crewmate here. I have a bit of a polarity issue, so it's rank 4 split chamber instead of rank 5, but it should be rank 5. Also, make sure your Opticore is actually fully ranked. This is very important because crewmates pretend like they're master rank 0. So if you have unranked weapons, they act like they do not have mods on it. You can also replace Prime Tread with Speed Trigger. The reason we are running Prime Tread is because it gives a bit of punch through, which is important if for some reason your crewmate is maybe stuck behind a rock or stuck inside your Necromech after you land. Okay, let's get into a demonstration run. I am running Credit Booster, Credit Blessing, and Damage Blessing. Damage Blessing also applies to our Necromech. And now I'm just waiting for the spawn at 8.
Leg it. Once that mother hits the overcharge radius, we're done for. No second chances. There she is.
We cast our abilities. We throw our crewmate and just start double jumping, aiming, throwing, and shooting. Place our mech. As soon as the shield is over, 1 charge shot each, or 2 if you don't have a Riven. Recast abilities, and go up to do pylons. Which is just, if you don't know where they land, you just wait for them to land. Like this. And then you go back down, back into your mech, and shoot legs again. And repeat the same process again. Don't forget to recast your abilities, especially Vex Armor, before it runs out. Also, if your crewmate dies, you just have to skip Toxic by shooting it with your operator. And there we go. 140 to the kill. And we'll see how many credits we get. When you kill it, follow this leg. And where it falls down, here, is where you place effigy. Also make sure you don't walk away from it, or you don't get the double credits.
What is it?
Satellite just moved. Nev's crew must have figured out our bypass. It's realigning.
Sparky, we're running out of time. You have to kill her now. We won't get another chance at this.
And so we got 703,000 credits in just over 2 in-game minutes. And that should be about it. Keep in mind, the 703k are without our Darza Kavat having doubled anything. So if you're lucky, you can get up to double that, so up to 1.4 million, and that's without any credit weekends or Valus boosters. Aside from that, I will also link our Profit Taker guide that I also contribute to in the description. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments or in the Discord. That'll also be linked in the description. And yeah, that'll be it. See ya.